I stood in my driveway at 6 in the morning, staring at the thick layer of ice that had formed overnight, knowing for certain that my heated driveway system should have prevented this mess. And that's when I realized something was terribly wrong. The temperature in Boulder, Colorado had dropped to 15 degrees overnight, and my brand new heated driveway system, which had cost me nearly $20,000 to install just 2 months ago, wasn't working. I could see my breath forming clouds in the freezing air as I walked back inside to grab my phone and check the system's controls. Everything looked fine on the digital display inside my garage. The system showed it was operational, set to activate automatically when temperatures dropped below 32 degrees, but clearly, no heat was reaching the driveway surface. I'm Xavier Cunningham, and I had moved into this neighborhood in Boulder about 8 months ago after accepting a position as a software engineer at a tech startup downtown. The house was perfect, a modern 2-story with solar panels and all the energy-efficient features I could want. The heated driveway had been my one splurge, something I justified after growing up in Florida and never wanting to deal with shoveling snow or slipping on ice during Colorado winters. After checking the indoor controls, I went back outside and walked around to the side of my house where the electrical junction box for the driveway system was located. That's when my stomach dropped. The metal cover of the junction box was hanging open, and someone had physically disconnected the power supply to my heated driveway system. The wires had been pulled apart and taped off, clearly done by someone who knew what they were doing, at least enough to disconnect it without electrocuting themselves. My mind raced through possibilities. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately tampered with my electrical system. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the disconnected wires, the open junction box, and the surrounding area. Then I noticed something else. Footprints in the light dusting of snow that had fallen yesterday evening led from my junction box directly toward the sidewalk, and they were small, probably from women's boots. I was about to call the police when my neighbor, Tom Harrison, came out of his house next door. Tom was in his 60s, retired from teaching, and had lived in the neighborhood for over 15 years. He waved at me and walked over, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Morning, Xavier. Something wrong with your driveway heater?" he asked, nodding toward the ice-covered surface. "Someone disconnected it," I said, showing him the junction box. "These wires didn't come apart on their own." Tom's expression darkened. "Let me guess. You got a visit from Brenda yesterday." Brenda Morrison. "She's the HOA president. Real piece of work, that one." Tom shook his head. "Did she come by and complain about your heated driveway?" I thought back to the previous afternoon. A woman in her late 40s with an extremely short haircut that she probably called a pixie cut, but looked more like she'd asked for the manager's special at the salon, had indeed knocked on my door. She'd been wearing a puffy vest over a turtleneck and had a tablet clutched to her chest like it was the Holy Grail. "Are you Xavier Cunningham?" she'd asked without introducing herself. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Morrison, president of the Clearwater Heights HOA. I need to discuss a serious violation with you." She tapped on her tablet with sharp, aggressive movements. "Your heated driveway system is causing an unacceptable increase in the neighborhood's collective energy consumption." I'd been confused. "I'm sorry, what? My energy bill is my own business. I pay for my electricity. It reflects poorly on our community's commitment to environmental responsibility," Brenda had said, her voice rising. "We have standards here. I'm going to need you to disconnect that system and return to traditional snow removal methods." "No," I'd said simply. "I'm not doing that. I installed it legally, It's on my property, and I pay for the electricity it uses. The HOA has no authority over my personal energy consumption." Brenda's face had turned an impressive shade of red. "We'll see about that. I have the authority to maintain community standards, Mr. Cunningham. You're going to regret being so difficult." She'd stormed off, and I'd honestly forgotten about the encounter until this moment. I relayed the conversation to Tom, who groaned. "She did it. I guarantee you Brenda cut your power." Tom looked genuinely angry. "She pulled the same kind of thing with the Hendersons 3 years ago. They installed a fountain in their front yard, totally within code and on their property. Brenda decided it was too ostentatious and had someone drain it and disconnect it while they were on vacation. They couldn't prove it was her, but everyone knew." "That's insane," I said, "and illegal. This is criminal tampering with electrical systems." "You'd think that would stop her, but Brenda believes she's above the rules. She thinks being HOA president gives her some kind of supreme authority over everyone and everything in the neighborhood." I pulled out my phone again. "I'm calling the police. This is vandalism at minimum, and tampering with electrical systems is serious." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good. It's about time someone held her accountable. Do you need me to give a statement about what she's been like? That might help, thanks." The Boulder Police Department sent an officer out within an hour. Officer Martinez was a young woman who listened carefully as I explained the situation, showed her the disconnected junction box, and the photos I'd taken. I also mentioned Brenda's visit the previous day and her threats. "You're right that this is serious," Officer Martinez said, examining the junction box. "Tampering with electrical systems is against the law. We'll need to investigate. Do you have any direct evidence that this Brenda Morrison person did this?" "Just the timing of her threats and the footprints leading from my junction box toward the street," I said. "My neighbor can also speak to her pattern of behavior." Officer Martinez took Tom's statement as well, documenting everything carefully. "I'm going to need to speak with Miss Morrison. In the meantime, I'd recommend calling a licensed electrician to come out and properly reconnect your system. Don't touch it yourself, because we need to preserve this as evidence as much as possible, but we also can't leave exposed wiring like this." "I'll call someone right now," I said. After Officer Martinez left to go speak with Brenda, I contacted the electrical company that had installed my heated driveway system. They promised to send someone out that afternoon. I also called my office and let them know I'd be working from home that day. While I waited for the electrician, I did some research on the Clearwater Heights HOA. What I found was enlightening and disturbing in equal measure. The HOA had been formed about 20 years ago when the neighborhood was first developed, and for the first 15 years, it had been a relatively benign organization focused on maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. Then Brenda Morrison had moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago and had quickly inserted herself into the HOA board. Within 2 years, she'd maneuvered herself into the presidency and had been running the organization like her personal fiefdom ever since. The HOA's online records, which were required to be publicly accessible to all residents, showed a dramatic increase in violation notices and fines under Brenda's leadership. What had once averaged maybe 10 violations per year had ballooned to over 100. Brenda had been citing people for everything from leaving their trash, cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, to having the wrong shade of white paint on their garage doors. I also found several forum posts and social media discussions from other residents complaining about Brenda's behavior. One family had been fined repeatedly for having a vegetable garden in their backyard, which Brenda claimed violated some vague aesthetic standard. even though their backyard wasn't even visible from the street. Another resident had been harassed about their son's truck, which Brenda decided was too commercial-looking, even though it was just a regular pickup truck the kid used for his construction job. The more I read, the angrier I got. This woman had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and apparently, most people either paid the fines to avoid confrontation or moved away. I pulled up the HOA's governing documents, the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that all residents were supposed to abide by. Reading through them carefully, I couldn't find a single mention of restrictions on heated driveways, energy consumption, or anything that Brenda could have used to justify her demands. She'd made it all up, trying to intimidate me into compliance. The electrician arrived around 2 in the afternoon. His name was Gary, and he was with Mountain Peak Electric, the company that had installed my system originally. I showed him the disconnected junction box, and his expression went from professional concern to outright alarm. "Whoever did this had no idea what they were doing," Gary said, kneeling down to examine the wiring more closely. "They're lucky they didn't kill themselves. This is a 200-amp circuit. If they'd touched the wrong wires while disconnecting this, they could have been electrocuted instantly." "But they managed to disconnect it successfully," I said. "Sure, but look at how the wires were taped off. This tape isn't even rated for electrical use, and they didn't shut off the breaker first. You can tell because of the scorch marks here on the wire coating. There was arcing when they pulled these apart. They literally got lucky that they didn't start a fire or kill themselves." Gary took his own set of photos, explaining that his company would need to file a report with the state electrical board about this tampering. "We're required to report any dangerous tampering with electrical systems we discover. This is serious stuff. The state takes this very seriously because of the fire and safety hazards." "How long will it take to fix?" I asked. "I can have it reconnected in about 20 minutes, but I need to inspect all the wiring first to make sure nothing was damaged. Give me an hour to be safe." While Gary worked, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Mr. Cunningham, I spoke with Brenda Morrison. She denied having anything to do with disconnecting your driveway heater." "Of course she did," I said. "However, she did admit to visiting your property yesterday evening around 7 p.m. She claims she was just taking a walk around the neighborhood and stopped to look at your driveway system because she was concerned about it. She admitted to being on my property without permission. Essentially, yes. She claims she has the right as HOA president to inspect properties for violations. I informed her that's not actually the case without permission or proper notice. She became quite agitated. I've documented everything, and I'm moving forward with the investigation. In the meantime, I'd recommend you consider installing a security camera system if you don't already have one. I have a doorbell camera, but it doesn't cover the side of the house where the junction box is," I said. "I'll get more cameras installed." After Officer Martinez hung up, Gary came around from the side of the house, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good news is that no wires were damaged beyond the connection point. I've reconnected everything and tested the system. It's working perfectly now. Your driveway should start melting that ice within the next 30 minutes. Thanks, Gary. Send me the bill." "Will do. And hey, I hope they catch whoever did this. This kind of tampering is no joke." He packed up his tools and headed to his truck. Before he drove off, he rolled down his window. "Oh, and I filed that report with the state electrical board like I mentioned. They'll probably send an inspector out within the next few days to document everything. Just a heads up." True to Gary's word, my driveway started warming up and the ice began to melt. I spent the rest of the afternoon working but couldn't focus properly. I kept thinking about Brenda and her casual assumption that she could just tamper with my property. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I needed to take serious action. That evening, I ordered a comprehensive security camera system online with next-day delivery. I also started documenting everything, creating a detailed timeline of events, saving all the photos I'd taken, and compiling the information I'd found about Brenda's history with the HOA. The next morning, I installed 4 new security cameras around my house, covering every angle of my property, including the junction box for the heated driveway. The system was wireless and recorded to the cloud, so even if someone tried to tamper with the cameras themselves, the footage would be preserved. I'd barely finished installing the cameras when I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a professional-sounding woman's voice came through. "Is this Xavier Cunningham?" "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Diana Peters from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. I'm calling about a report we received regarding electrical tampering at your residence. Do you have time to discuss this?" "Absolutely," I said. Diana explained that Mountain Peak Electric had filed a report about the tampering with my heated driveway system, and the PUC was required to investigate any reports of electrical system tampering due to public safety concerns. This kind of tampering creates serious fire and safety hazards, not just for you but for your neighbors as well. If improperly disconnected wires had caused a fire, it could have spread to neighboring properties. "I understand. What do you need from me?" "I'd like to schedule an inspection of your property and the electrical system in question. Would tomorrow morning work for you?" We scheduled the inspection for 9 a.m. the following day. After hanging up, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Brenda had no idea what she'd set in motion by tampering with my electrical system. She'd probably thought it would be a simple matter of disconnecting some wires, that I'd just give up and stop using my heated driveway. Instead, she'd committed what was apparently a serious offense that multiple government agencies were now investigating. The next morning, Diana Peters arrived right on time. She was in her 40s, all business, with a clipboard and a serious expression. She spent over an hour examining my heated driveway system, the junction box, taking measurements and photographs, and asking detailed questions about what I'd discovered and when. "Mr. Cunningham, I'm going to be direct with you. This tampering was extremely dangerous. Whoever did this either had just enough knowledge to be dangerous or got incredibly lucky. The way these wires were disconnected could have easily resulted in electrocution, fire, or both." Diana looked up from her clipboard. "You mentioned that you believe your HOA president, Brenda Morrison, was responsible." "I do. She came to my house the day before this happened and explicitly threatened me about my heated driveway. She demanded I disconnect it. When I refused, she said I'd regret it. The next morning, it was disconnected." Diana made notes. "The police are investigating the criminal aspects, but from the Utilities Commission's perspective, we're also going to pursue this. Tampering with electrical systems falls under our regulatory authority, and we can impose significant fines and penalties. Do you know if Miss Morrison has any electrical licensing or training?" "Not that I'm aware of. I think she works in real estate." "Then she had absolutely no business touching any electrical systems." Diana finished her notes. "I'll be submitting my report to the commission. We'll coordinate with the police investigation. In the meantime, keep your security cameras running and document any further contact with Miss Morrison." Over the next week, things escalated quickly. Officer Martinez called to inform me that they had enough evidence to charge Brenda with criminal mischief and criminal tampering. The footprints outside my junction box had been photographed and measured, and they'd obtained a warrant to compare them with Brenda's footwear. It was a match to a pair of boots they'd found in her garage. "We're moving forward with charges," Officer Martinez said. "The district attorney's office is taking this seriously, especially given the safety implications. Miss Morrison is being charged with second-degree criminal tampering, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor in Colorado, and criminal mischief. She'll need to appear in court." "What about the HOA? Does she still have authority to act as president while facing these charges?" "That's between the HOA board and the residents. We can't force her to step down, but you might want to raise that issue with your neighbors." I decided to do exactly that. I spent the next few days talking to my neighbors, many of whom had their own horror stories about Brenda's reign as HOA president. Tom Harrison was happy to help organize a special meeting of the HOA to discuss Brenda's position. According to the HOA bylaws, which I'd read thoroughly by this point, any resident could call for a special meeting with signatures from at least 20% of the homeowners. Our neighborhood had 62 homes, so we needed 13 signatures. We got 32. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center. The community center was a small building at the entrance to our neighborhood, primarily used for HOA meetings and the occasional neighborhood event. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the parking lot already half full. Apparently, word had spread, and people were eager to attend. Inside, rows of folding chairs had been set up and they were filling quickly. I spotted Tom near the front and joined him. "Good turnout," he said quietly. "People are fed up." Brenda arrived exactly at 7, flanked by 2 other board members, Gary Peterson and Linda Calloway. I'd learned that Gary worked in insurance and mostly just went along with whatever Brenda wanted to avoid conflict. Linda had been on the board for years and had occasionally tried to push back against Brenda's more extreme actions, but she'd largely been overruled or ignored. Brenda looked furious as she took in the packed room. She sat at the front table and banged a gavel, calling the meeting to order. "This special meeting has been called to order. Let the record show that this meeting was requested by Xavier Cunningham and several other residents. Mr. Cunningham, you have the floor." I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Thank you. I called this meeting because I believe it's time for Brenda Morrison to step down as HOA president." The room erupted in murmurs and whispers. Brenda banged her gavel again. "That's absurd. You can't just call a meeting and demand someone step down." "Actually, according to our bylaws, residents can call for a vote of no confidence in any board member with cause. I believe there's more than sufficient cause." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared with all my documentation. For those who don't know, Brenda came to my home last week and demanded I disconnect my heated driveway system, claiming it violated HOA standards. When I refused and pointed out that there's nothing in our CC and Articles about heated driveways or energy consumption, she threatened me. The next morning, I discovered that someone had physically disconnected my heated driveway by tampering with my electrical junction box. More murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people looked shocked. I continued. "The police investigated and found evidence linking Brenda to the tampering. She's currently facing criminal charges for second-degree criminal tampering and criminal mischief. Additionally, the Colorado Public Utilities Commission is investigating and will likely impose significant fines because of the safety hazards created by her actions." "That's not proven," Brenda shouted, standing up. "I'm innocent until proven guilty. You admitted to the police that you were on my property that evening," I said calmly, "and your footprints match the ones found at the scene of the tampering." But even setting aside the criminal charges, your behavior as HOA president has been problematic for years. I opened my folder and began reading from the list I'd compiled. In the past 3 years, you've issued over 200 violation notices to residents. That's more than 3 times the number issued in the previous 10 years combined. You've cited people for violations that don't exist in our CC and RTCS. You've harassed residents about vegetable gardens, pickup trucks, and fountains, all of which are allowed under our governing documents. You've used your position to intimidate and bully people into compliance with rules you've made up. Tom stood up. I'll vouch for that. Brenda tried to fine me last year because my grandson's basketball hoop was visible from the street. There's nothing in our CC and RTCS about basketball hoops, but she claimed it was an aesthetic violation. When I pushed back, she threatened to put a lien on my house. That's my job. Brenda's face was turning red. I'm supposed to maintain standards in this neighborhood. No, Linda Calloway said, speaking up for the first time. She looked tired but determined. Your job is to enforce the CC and RTCS as written, not to make up new rules based on your personal preferences. I've tried to tell you this dozens of times, Brenda, but you won't listen. You've overstepped your authority repeatedly, and frankly, you've made living in this neighborhood miserable for a lot of people. Gary Peterson shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say anything. Several other residents stood up to share their experiences with Brenda's overreach. A woman named Sandra described being fined for having the wrong shade of beige on her mailbox post. A man named Robert talked about being cited for parking his work van in his own driveway overnight, even though there was no restriction on that in the CC and RTCS. The stories went on for nearly an hour. Brenda tried to interrupt several times, but the crowd shouted her down. It became clear that her reign as HOA president had affected nearly everyone in the neighborhood in some negative way. Finally, I called for a vote. According to our bylaws, we can vote to remove a board member with a 2/3 majority of residents present at a properly called meeting. All those in favor of removing Brenda Morrison from her position as HOA president, please raise your hand. Nearly every hand in the room went up. I did a quick count. Out of 48 residents present, 43 voted to remove Brenda. It was well over the 2/3 needed. The vote passes, I announced. Brenda Morrison is removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Brenda stood up, her face purple with rage. You can't do this. I'll sue all of you. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without me. I think we'll manage, Linda said dryly. Gary, do you want to take over as interim president until we can hold proper elections? Gary looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but reluctantly nodded. Sure, I guess. Brenda grabbed her things and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her so hard that several people jumped. The room erupted in applause and relieved chatter. Tom clapped me on the back. Well done, Xavier. That's been a long time coming. Over the next few weeks, things in the neighborhood began to change. Gary, as interim president, was much more reasonable and actually followed the CC and RTCS as written rather than making up rules. Linda Calloway stepped up to help, and together they started reviewing and rescinding many of the bogus fines and violation notices Brenda had issued over the years. Meanwhile, the legal process against Brenda moved forward. I was contacted by the district attorney's office and asked to give a formal statement and testify if the case went to trial. The DA's assistant, a serious young man named Michael Rodriguez, explained that they were building a strong case. The physical evidence is solid, Michael said during our meeting at his office in downtown Boulder. We have your testimony, the timeline, the the footprints, and Miss Morrison's own admission that she was on your property that evening. We also have testimony from the electrician about the dangerous nature of the tampering. The Utilities Commission is pursuing their own case as well. What kind of penalties is she looking at? I asked. Criminal tampering in the second degree is a Class 1 misdemeanor, which can carry up to 18 months in jail and fines up to $5,000. The criminal mischief charge is also a misdemeanor. If convicted on both counts, she could face jail time, though first offenders often get probation. The Utilities Commission fines could be significant, though, potentially tens of thousands of dollars depending on what they determine. Good, I said. What she did was dangerous and could have hurt someone. A few days later, I received a certified letter from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Inside was a detailed report of their investigation and their findings. The letter explained that the PUC had determined Brenda Morrison had indeed tampered with my electrical system, and that her actions had created a significant safety hazard. They were imposing a fine of $45,000 on Brenda for the tampering, payable within 90 days. The letter also noted that the fine would increase by 20% if not paid on time, and that failure to pay could result in additional legal action. I made a copy of the letter for my records and forwarded the information to Officer Martinez and the DA's office. I also posted a notice on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, letting everyone know about the PUC's findings and fine. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors commented, expressing support and relief that Brenda was being held accountable. Not everyone was supportive, though. A few of Brenda's friends in the neighborhood, people who had apparently benefited from her selective enforcement of rules, criticized me for going after her so aggressively. One woman named Patricia left a long comment about how I was ruining Brenda's life over something minor. I responded calmly, pointing out that tampering with electrical systems wasn't minor and that Brenda had made the choice to break the law. The criminal case moved forward. Brenda's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office wasn't interested in being lenient. Michael Rodriguez called me to explain their reasoning. Miss Morrison has shown no remorse for her actions. She's maintained that she had the right to access your electrical system as HOA president, and that you were the one in the wrong for refusing to comply with her demands. That attitude, combined with the safety implications of what she did, means we're not offering a favorable plea deal. We're prepared to take this to trial if necessary. I'll testify if you need me to, I said. We will need you. Trial is scheduled for 8 weeks from now. In the meantime, life in the neighborhood improved dramatically. Gary and Linda organized a series of town halls to discuss what changes people wanted to see in the HOA's operations. One of the first things we did was vote to amend the bylaws to include more oversight of the president's authority and clearer procedures for handling violations. We also established a review committee to handle any disputes about fines or violations before they could be imposed. I also got to know more of my neighbors. Without Brenda's constant drama and harassment, people were friendlier and more engaged. We organized a neighborhood barbecue for the first time in years, and nearly everyone attended. It was nice to see the community coming together in a positive way. My heated driveway continued to work perfectly. We had several more snowfalls that winter, and each time, my driveway remained clear and ice-free while I watched my neighbors shovel. A few of them asked about my system, and I was happy to share information about the installation process and costs. Tom joked that I'd probably start a trend, and sure enough, by spring, 3 other families in the neighborhood had contacted Mountain Peak Electric about installing their own heated driveway systems. The trial date arrived in early March. The courthouse in Boulder was busy, with people coming and going for various cases. I arrived early and met with Michael Rodriguez to go over my testimony one more time. He seemed confident. "We have a strong case," Michael said. "The physical evidence is overwhelming, and your testimony about her threats the day before the tampering is crucial for establishing motive. Just tell the truth and stay calm, even if her attorney tries to rattle you." Brenda arrived with her attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda looked haggard. The stress of the past few months had clearly taken a toll. She didn't make eye contact with me. The trial lasted 2 days. I testified on the first day, describing Brenda's visit to my home. Her demands that I disconnect my heated driveway, her threats when I refused, and my discovery of the tampering the next morning. Brenda's attorney, whose name was Richard Stevens, tried to suggest that someone else could have tampered with my electrical system, but the physical evidence made that argument weak. Officer Martinez testified about the investigation, the matching footprints, and Brenda's admission that she'd been on my property that evening. Gary from Mountain Peak Electric testified about the dangerous nature of the tampering and the potential consequences if things had gone wrong. Diana Peters from the Utilities Commission testified about the safety hazards and the PUC's findings. On the second day, Brenda took the stand in her own defense. It was a disaster. She stuck to her story that she had the right as HOA president to inspect properties and enforce standards. But when the prosecutor pressed her on what specific provision in the CC and Articus gave her that authority, she couldn't answer. When asked directly if she disconnected my heated driveway, she claimed she'd only been checking the junction box to see if it met code and that it must have come disconnected accidentally. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen, demolished that claim. "Miss Morrison, you're not a licensed electrician, correct?" "No, but I know enough to check if something meets code." "How did you learn to check electrical code compliance?" "I've read about it. I educate myself." "But you have no formal training or licensing." "No, but that doesn't mean I can't check basic safety." "So you're saying you opened Mr. Cunningham's electrical junction box to check for safety, and it just happened to come disconnected while you were examining it?" "Yes." Sarah held up the photos Gary had taken of the disconnected wires. These wires were deliberately pulled apart and taped off. This wasn't an accidental disconnection. "Can you explain how this happened if you were just examining the box?" Brenda fumbled for an answer but couldn't provide a coherent explanation. Sarah continued to press, and Brenda grew more flustered and defensive. At one point she actually said, "He shouldn't have been using that system anyway. It was wasteful and set a bad example for the neighborhood." Sarah pounced on that. "So you did disconnect it deliberately because you disagreed with Mr. Cunningham's choice to use a heated driveway?" Brenda realized her mistake too late. "No, I just thought someone needed to do something about it. The damage was done." Even her own attorney looked pained. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty on both counts of criminal tampering and criminal mischief. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Hendricks, scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood before the court and spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor, what Brenda Morrison did wasn't just annoying or inconvenient. It was dangerous. According to the electrician who examined my system, the way she disconnected those wires could have caused a fire or electrocution. She put my life at risk, and potentially my neighbors' lives as well. Beyond that, her actions were part of a pattern of abuse of authority as HOA president. She believed she was above the law and could do whatever she wanted to enforce her personal preferences. I hope this court sentence reflects the seriousness of her actions and sends a message that this behavior won't be tolerated. Judge Hendricks listened carefully, then turned her attention to Brenda. "Miss Morrison, you had the opportunity to make this right at many points along the way. You could have accepted that Mr. Cunningham had the right to use his heated driveway. You could have admitted what you did and apologized. Instead, you maintained a belief that you had special authority that put you above the law. You tampered with an electrical system, creating serious safety hazards because you didn't like someone's choice about their own property. That kind of vigilante behavior cannot be tolerated in a civilized society." The judge sentenced Brenda to 1 year in jail, with 6 months suspended, meaning she'd serve 6 months if she completed probation successfully. She was also sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the cost of repairing my heated driveway system, which came to about $1,500. Combined with the $45,000 fine from the Utilities Commission, Brenda was facing significant financial and legal consequences. Brenda's face crumpled as the sentence was read. Her attorney tried to argue for a lighter sentence, but Judge Hendricks was unmoved. "Your client showed no remorse and even testified that she believed she was in the right. That concerns me greatly. She needs to understand that her actions had serious consequences." Brenda was taken into custody to begin serving her sentence. I felt a mix of emotions as I left the courthouse. I was glad she was being held accountable, but I also felt a bit sad that things had come to this point. If Brenda had just been reasonable from the start, none of this would have happened. She could have been an effective HOA president if she'd focused on actually helping the community instead of trying to control everyone. Over the following months, the neighborhood continued to improve. We held elections for new HOA board members, and a retired engineer named Walter Green was elected as the new president. Walter was the opposite of Brenda in every way: practical, reasonable, and focused on actual community needs rather than petty rules enforcement. Under his leadership, the HOA started focusing on things that actually mattered: maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and addressing real safety concerns. The Utilities Commission's fine against Brenda was upheld after she attempted to appeal it. Unable to pay the full amount, she was forced to sell her home in the neighborhood. I heard through Tom that she moved to an apartment in Denver and was working 2 jobs to pay off her debts. Part of me felt bad for her, but a larger part recognized that these were consequences of her own choices. My heated driveway continued to work flawlessly through the rest of that winter and into the next. Every time I looked out at my clear, ice-free driveway while snow fell around it, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because of what had happened to Brenda, but because I'd stood up for what was right and helped create positive change in my community. Tom and I became good friends. He told me stories about the neighborhood before Brenda's reign as HOA president, when it had been a friendly, welcoming place. "You've helped us get back to that," he said one afternoon as we stood in my driveway, watching the new security cameras I'd kept installed. "People aren't afraid of getting bogus fines anymore. They're not worried about expressing themselves or making improvements to their homes. That's what a neighborhood should be." The following fall, I was approached by several neighbors about running for a position on the HOA board. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to get too involved in HOA politics after everything that had happened. But Walter Green convinced me it would be good to have someone on the board who'd been through what I had and understood the importance of following the actual rules rather than making up new ones. I agreed to run and was elected to the board as treasurer in a landslide. My first act was to propose a complete audit of the HOA's finances under Brenda's leadership. What we found was troubling but not entirely surprising. Brenda had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, disguising them as community improvement costs. She'd spent thousands of dollars on things that had nothing to do with the neighborhood, fancy dinners she'd claimed were board meetings, personal shopping trips she'd categorized as supplies for community events, even a weekend trip to Vail she'd labeled as a conference on HOA management. We compiled all the evidence and turned it over to the police. Brenda was charged with additional crimes related to embezzlement and fraud. With her still on probation for the tampering conviction, these new charges resulted in her probation being revoked. She ended up serving the full year in jail that she'd originally been sentenced to, plus additional time for the embezzlement. The HOA never recovered the embezzled funds. Brenda had spent most of it, and what little she had left went toward paying her legal fees and the Utilities Commission fine. We had to impose a small special assessment on all homeowners to replenish the HOA's reserves, but everyone understood why it was necessary. Most people were just relieved that the full extent of Brenda's misconduct had been uncovered, and she was finally being held fully accountable. 2 years after the initial incident with my heated driveway, life in Clearwater Heights had transformed completely. The neighborhood was thriving under new leadership. We'd started a community garden, organized regular social events, and people actually looked forward to HOA meetings because they were productive and focused on real issues rather than petty complaints. I'd even started a neighborhood newsletter, using my tech skills to create a simple website and email system to keep everyone informed about what was happening in the community. It included a section where residents could suggest ideas or raise concerns, and the board actually listened and responded. It was everything an HOA should be, a tool for building community rather than a weapon for controlling people. My heated driveway had become something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would often ask about it during neighborhood tours, and I'd tell them the whole story. Some people thought it was crazy that someone would tamper with electrical systems over such a petty issue. But I explained that Brenda's actions had actually led to positive change by exposing how badly the HOA had been run and forcing the community to take control back. 3 other families had installed their own heated driveway systems, and not once did anyone complain or try to stop them. The new HOA board had even amended the CC and Articus to explicitly state that energy-efficient home improvements were encouraged, not discouraged, as long as they met local building codes. Tom Harrison passed away during the 3rd winter after the incident. He was 82 and went peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, his daughter thanked me for helping make her father's final years in the neighborhood happy ones. After that woman took over the HOA, Dad was miserable, she said. He talked about moving, but he'd lived in that house for so long. When you stood up to her and helped get rid of her, it made such a difference. He told me several times how grateful he was. That conversation reminded me why all of this had mattered. It wasn't really about my heated driveway or even about Brenda specifically. It was about standing up to bullies, following the actual rules rather than made-up ones, and building the kind of community where people wanted to live. Tom had been right from the beginning. Someone needed to hold Brenda accountable, and I'd been in the right place at the right time to do it. 4 years after the initial incident, I was still living in the same house in Clearwater Heights. I'd been promoted twice at work and was now a senior software architect. My heated driveway was still working perfectly, though I'd had to do some routine maintenance on the heating elements. The security cameras I'd installed had proven useful several times, though never again for catching anyone tampering with my property. Mostly, they'd helped identify package thieves and once caught footage of a hit-and-run accident that helped the police find the driver. The HOA was still running smoothly under good leadership. Walter Green had served 2 terms as president before stepping down, and a woman named Rachel Torres had taken over. She was equally competent and focused on actual community needs. The neighborhood consistently ranked high in local surveys of desirable places to live in Boulder, and property values had increased steadily. I occasionally wondered what had happened to Brenda Morrison after she'd served her jail time and finished her probation. I'd heard she'd moved out of state, possibly to Arizona or Nevada, trying to start fresh somewhere people didn't know her history. Part of me hoped she'd learned from the experience and found a way to be happy without trying to control everyone around her. But a more realistic part of me suspected she was probably still the same person, just hopefully without the authority to impose her will on others. The story of the heated driveway incident had become part of neighborhood lore. New residents would hear about it and often come to me with questions, wanting to make sure they understood their rights and the HOA's actual authority. I was always happy to explain, pointing them to the CC and Articus, and encouraging them to read the actual rules rather than just assuming the HOA could tell them what to do. Several people from other neighborhoods had reached out to me over the years, asking for advice about dealing with their own difficult HOA situations. I'd created a simple guide about how to research CC and Articus, document violations of proper procedure, and organize other homeowners to create positive change. I wasn't trying to be some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I actually thought HOAs could serve important purposes. But they needed to be run properly, following their own rules and serving the community rather than controlling it. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, the HOA organized a neighborhood party. It wasn't specifically about the anniversary. Nobody wanted to celebrate the conflict, but rather a general community celebration. As I stood in the community center, surrounded by neighbors and friends, looking at the functional, healthy community we'd built together, I felt genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished. My heated driveway had sparked a transformation that went far beyond keeping my driveway clear of ice. It had exposed corruption and abuse of authority, brought a community together to demand better leadership, and ultimately created a neighborhood where people felt respected and valued rather than harassed and controlled. That was worth far more than the $20,000 I'd spent on the installation. As winter approached again, I looked forward to another season of walking out to a clear, ice-free driveway while snow fell around me. But more than that, I looked forward to living in a community that had learned valuable lessons about the importance of following actual rules, respecting property rights, and working together rather than letting one person's desire for control tear everyone apart. The heated driveway still worked perfectly, just as it had from the beginning. But its real value had turned out to be something I never could have anticipated when I first decided to install it. It had become a symbol of standing up for what's right, of refusing to be bullied, and of the positive change that can happen when people work together toward common goals. And every time Brenda Morrison's name came up in conversation, which happened less and less as years passed, it served as a reminder to everyone in Clearwater Heights about what happens when someone abuses a position of authority. The community had learned from that experience, and we were all better off for it. The HOA now existed to serve the residents, as it should have all along, rather than the residents existing to be controlled by whoever happened to be in charge. My story, the story of how an HOA president cut my heated driveway power and ended up facing serious legal consequences, had a happy ending after all. Not because someone was punished, though that accountability was important, but because it led to lasting positive change in my community. That was something worth fighting for, and I'd do it all again if I had to. Though hopefully, I'd never have to, because we'd built something better, something that would last long after everyone involved in the original incident had moved on or moved away. The heated driveway kept my driveway clear, but the fight for what was right had cleared the path for something much more important. A genuine community built on mutual respect, actual rules fairly applied, and the understanding that we all did better when we worked together rather than letting petty tyrants control our lives. That lesson, learned through conflict but resulting in cooperation, was the real story of the heated driveway incident, and it was a story with an ending I could truly be proud of.